Our sister is the wife of a minister and has always been involved in the ministry of the gospel with him. Now he works as an assistant on a team, but there's no paid women's worker in the team, and she still does lots of the work, but she's not part of the team, and she's not being paid. She's not seen as the women's worker either, and so how do you fit this in together? That kind of thing. Yeah, this is the kind of evolutionary problem we're having with the shift in the nature of work in our society. In a previous day and age, it was obvious. The clergy wives did just sheer mountains of work, and well, in fact, when I was first ordained, it was one of the big fights that we used to have, was whether the clergy wife was expected or required to do what work. Now, today, how do we operate in this kind of world that we're in? There's no written law in the Church Administration Acts and Ordinances as to what to do, but I'll tell you what I did for my sake and what I would encourage others to do. That is, within the staff meetings, I always said no wife ever had to come, but any wife who ever wanted to could. Because there's so much time wasted with men having to repeat to their wives what was said when they get home. It'd be just easier if she heard it in the first place. And because her participation and contribution was, for me, highly valued always. The women saw things the men just didn't see. They just knew things about people and connections that the men just didn't get. And so to have the wives around was always a blessing, but I never wanted to impose that upon them, because very often, especially with their young wives and young mothers, you know, how often are kids sick, and how often are you off at doctors and having to go and pick people up from school and whatever else it is. So it was a matter of freedom and choice to come or not to come, which I thought was an important and valuable thing when they did come, always. But on the subject of pay, it is a difficulty. I am sufficiently old-fashioned and anti-materialistic that I still believe ministers should be paid a stipend, not a salary, and a stipend is sufficient money to keep you and your family alive without needing to find other sources of money. And so it has always been my assumption, and my wife and my assumption, that we live on our stipend and that we do not seek other money. So Helen has never worked, nor actually raised money on other things, done other things to get money in. We've just accepted the stipend as the basis upon which we live. And so she has no monetary motivation to go to work, and she has so many gospel opportunities while I was the rector of a church that she had her hands full, especially with 3 kids and then subsequent grandchildren. One of the sadnesses we've experienced in leaving the cathedral and parish ministry is that her ministry is seriously curtailed by the fact that I'm no longer the rector of the church. And I think one of the other conflicts we've seen is, as churches turn to employ women's worker, there is tension between the rector's wife, who's been doing these things for a year, and now the women's worker who thinks she's employed to do these things. And I think that's created a tension. I'm not going to give you the answer and solution to that tension. I'm just saying this is a new tension that has to be resolved and worked through. We were mercifully helped because the women that came and worked with us at the cathedral, for example, loved and adored Helen and were very keen for her to keep doing what she was doing and from then to learn from them. But I can see that's the blessing of God with the particular personalities involved. It could have been a disaster with a different set of personalities and the struggle. But it's a great joy for many Christian women to be able to be married to a minister and live with sufficient money in a stipend to do the work of the ministry that they want to do. And it's a terrific joy and boon for the minister if he has such a wife. I'm not saying a minister's wife couldn't or shouldn't work. So I know one minister's wife who is now working in church work, but has had to seek money to do it, because the only way it can be done is by getting somebody else to do the housework. So I can understand there's those balances. It's just not a choice we made. You never do ministry for money. What you do is you free someone from working in order to do ministry. Well, I'm freed from working to do it. I mentioned earlier that you don't minister for money, it's for service that you do, and so it's not got to do with status, it's got to do with service, and that we shouldn't be thinking in the materialistic mindset of money. And so the question comes in, well, why don't we think of a different way of doing it, of just having very much larger teams of volunteers rather than paying some people to do it? Have I got the question right? Yeah, it's been tried. It's called the Brethren, and it's been demonstrated to fail. It failed in the previous years when people were rich enough to be able to do it. I don't think it's got any chance of success in the future when people cannot afford to do it. Our problem today is a drying up of volunteers because people cannot afford Sydney's house prices. They cannot afford one income as a way of living, let alone surviving. So it's getting just harder and harder for people to live. Now, I have a choice to that. That is, I choose to live poorly, but I have the benefits of long history, and so I've got financial backing. For people who are just starting out, for our migrants who are coming into a country with nothing, then it's just not possible for them to be able to do the kinds of voluntary work in the time that they've got available, living out the back of Campbelltown and working in factories on the other side of Sydney. Their lays are enormously long. The times and energies they've got available. The weekend is being destroyed by filthy rich capitalists who insist on opening all the shops 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and ignoring the families at weekends that Christians, I'm sad to say, have conceded to. We've destroyed that kind of social possibility in our present economic environment without being excessively countercultural. Now, you might say, well, let's be excessively countercultural. Let's set up the monastic system again with families. But no one's ever been able to do it, and the Brethren have tried for 150 years, and across the world the Brethren have given up. Practicalities. What do I think of a husband and wife both working in part-time or full-time ministry, but then you're saying one in a parish and the other in a parachurch or vice versa, right? Have I understood? Yes. My problem with Christian ministry is there's no time limits. And so it can be done, but it is very difficult because any ministry has as much time as you care to give to it. And if you limit your ministry by the time you give to it, you will limit your ministry in its effectiveness in the world. So I don't know of many parachurch ministries that I can just keep control of the time on. And I certainly don't know any parish ministries that can keep control of the time on, except those that are dying parishes. Because if the minister is not working flat out, the parish will die. So, yes, theoretically it can be done. In practice, I think it'd be very hard. I have met a couple, not here in Sydney, in another place, which I choose not to say, where they were both rectors of parishes. He was a rector of one, she was the rector of another. They did talk to me about how difficult they were finding life. I tried to be kind and gracious about what was so obviously stupid lifestyle that they had chosen. It is unworkable. That is just not Christian ministry. That is seeing ministry purely as a job, and if that's the case, don't do it. Thank you. I mentioned the idea that the first person I'd be putting on a staff was a woman. If that were the case, and that I invite wives to come into the staff meetings, if that's the case, would I invite the husband to come to the meetings? I was thinking of university ministries in particular, and the woman that I'd be looking to employ would be a single woman. I wouldn't start off looking for a married woman. I've employed married women in the past. It is a fairly difficult and tense relationship. God has been kind to me, and I've got away with it each time because the woman and her husband have been incredibly gracious. But it is very difficult to be employed in Christian ministry as a married woman, especially in a ministry like a university ministry, when what the boss wants and what the husband wants in terms of time, endeavour, etc., is different. Therein lies the difficulty we have with it. So university ministry is often conducted at the weirdest hours, and most men want their wife home sometime at 1 o'clock in the morning rather than out talking to university students or away at another weekend's house party or another. And so it's an unusual marriage that actually sustains that kind of... and I would be looking for a single woman. I have employed a couple of married women over the years, but when they've moved on to other things, I have sighed a great sigh of relief, because we've not had a crisis which I could see would loom if it wasn't for the fact of their graciousness, not mine, their graciousness. What advice do I give to a 19-year-old girl whose character and convictions are such of right and proper standing that she perceives that she should give herself to ministry training and theological education for her future, but whose senior pastor is discouraging her, not for character and convictions reasons, but because he himself believes that as a woman she should be more concerned about that marrying and bearing children, and or that the theological training is really only for preaching and preachers, and that the woman shouldn't preach. Got it? Sorry if my wording's not as good as yours. I always pay attention as an itinerant to what the senior pastors are saying, because they know the people in the situation better than the itinerant who bumps into them from time to time. And so I rarely will go against what the senior pastor of a local church, who's caring for the woman and for who has responsibility ultimately before God more than I do in my passing comments or contacts with them. Secondly, I'd want to say that that is especially true with someone who's 19. I worry about high-achieving women. High-achieving Christian women have a disproportionate number of them winding up with chronic fatigue. And so I'm always wary about the really capable, able girl who comes, who can conquer the universe, that encouraging her may actually not understand the problems and issues in life. A couple of reservations before I get stuck into the other direction, right? And so I'd worry about that. Next, Christian ministry requires stickability, and so I'm always concerned for undergraduates who want to leave university not finishing their course in order to go into Christian ministry. I don't care which course they do much, provided it's geography. University of Sydney and arts, that's the ultimate course. I don't care which ones they do much, but I want to see them finish. I want to see them... Now, they don't have to finish a 6-year course, a 3-year course will do, because you don't have to be in there any longer than that, but I like to see them finishing. So again, someone who's a bit underage and who's not finishing things and wants to change, I'm wary again. So there are certain little red lights, orange flags or whatever, orange lights, red flags flying that about that issue that I'd just, be checking. However, there are people in Christian ministries whose views of women and ministry are different to mine, and I have on occasions pushed for the girls to consider the alternative that I have to their pastor. So Helen and I spent hours with a lovely young woman once on exactly that issue. It was in another country, but her home pastor had a view of women that women didn't work, women had babies, and certainly women didn't lead church. The only ministry women could have was missionary, overseas missionary work, because he'd read enough of those kind of biographies, and only because men weren't going. Otherwise, even that she shouldn't do. She was a lovely girl, had all the gifts and all the abilities, and you would just described her. She was just terrific, except she was 21. However, her Baptist pastor succeeded and I failed. She wound up marrying a man who took her out in the mission field, although she's now returned to her home country. I think that's a disappointing and inadequate view of women. And I think the best training for a wife is Christian ministry, because being a wife and mother is all about service, and Christian ministry is all about service. And so I think to spend your years in learning the Bible only makes you a better mother, only makes you a better model for the other mothers, only gives you greater capacity for teaching the Word of God to other women. So the idea that you don't have women learning theological, I think, is wrong. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11, the principal verb is not about not preaching. The principal verb is, I want a woman to learn so that she may make decisions for herself about how to present her life in good works and the rest, and how to dress appropriately. So to restrict women from theological learning seems to me exactly contrary to what 1 Timothy 2, the passage he would most likely use about preaching, is on about. I think it's really important that we have women learning as whatever opportunities we have. And in this country, we have this incredible opportunity called more college. And I appreciate your laughing. I mean it. It actually is. When I've travelled the Christian world, let me tell you something, we have more college. It is extraordinary. What an opportunity is available to us. And so I think to get our women here and to get them to study only makes better wives, better mothers, better ministers of the gospel for more people for their salvation. And the thing is, my problem with what I'm saying myself is that window of opportunity is so small that if it was a man at 19, I'd say, don't be silly, go back and finish your course. If it was a girl at 19, well, 6 years, she's 25. It rips along very quickly for the girls, and so I may be tempted to say, come and do it. I'd be very interested in what her parents thought, because her parents will love her, even if they're non-Christians, they'll love her more necessarily than the pastor. So I'd be interested in how the parents were dealing with it, because she may have to go against her parents, but she may get the support there. And then the other thing to say is there are several men, pastors of churches in Sydney, who refused to encourage their women folk into MTS training that I took on at New South Wales University. The women that we did, all of them turned out to be fantastic, great, wonderful women, sisters of mine now 10, 20, 30 years later, and they're terrific to this day. Those rectors were just sheer blind, dumb. And what annoyed me the most was that the two of the rectors were keen feminists who were always arguing for women's ordination. But they wouldn't let the women in their own church be trained up and go to college and minister, because they wanted them to stay in their own church under their control. And it just irked me when I heard them stand up in synod and argue for women's ordination, when I knew that they wouldn't themselves encourage their women to go forth to be trained. Two related issues. What about the M model, the 5 M's, as a way of structuring church life, and what I think about that and what that does for the opportunities and possibilities for women ministry. And the second one is about the jobs and possibilities for women's ministry at the moment, and whether what we need to do is train people to be to still go and be volunteers because there's not enough jobs or opportunities. Is that it? Take the first one first. I think the person who's pushing the M model most in my world, there are others in other worlds, but the one I know about most is Andrew Hurd, and I think Andrew Hurd's one of the finest ministers that we have in Australia and a great blessing to us all. Andrew is an engineer, and he thinks structurally and clearly and theologically about structures, and he is creating the kind of infrastructural mechanism to make churches grow, which I don't think anybody else has really put their minds to at the same level and the same intensity. I am not a good manager. All my management was intuition, not written down on the back of an envelope. He has a whole system properly worked out and analysed that he has put into effect and is working and is helping other churches in the doing of it. It's not my model. I balk. I especially balk at the one of the M's being magnification, which I think is, never mind. I won't go on with that. And I think as Anglicans, we do have a certain problem with it, and I'm not sure that it quite trains the generalists that we need to train in our parish rector situation. That, I think, is one of the problems with it, because it tends to train people into the specialisations of ministries. However, I would have thought that that should have increased the number of women in ministries opportunities. I would have thought. I haven't checked that out. I don't know if that's the case. But I would have thought in the old system of training every person coming out of college to be a rector, that immediately put kibosh on a whole range of opportunities for women. But when you're training people to be youth workers, to be membership member, I can't remember all the M's. The only one I remember is magnification because I hate it so much. But you're going to be the member person or something. There are all kinds of jobs that I would have thought women could be involved in. I would have thought it would increase women's ministry opportunities rather than decrease them. But I haven't looked at that aspect of it particularly. In terms of the other question, that's just a lie. Not that you've lied, but that's just a lie. There are more opportunities for women in ministry than there are women that I know of churches that are looking for full-time women coming out of Moore College and they can't find them. There are jobs available and always have been available. There's two things I want to say about it. One is, at the moment, there are lots of jobs for women. There is this we keep on putting out this kind of crazy lie. It's about, there's enough clergy in Sydney, we don't need them anymore. That's rubbish. There are 21 vacant parishes right now because 2 years ago people kept on saying we don't need ministers, we've got too many in Moore College, we don't need them. We now have 21 vacant parishes. It takes time to develop a team of ministers, and you can't afford to say, we've got enough to this year so we don't need any in the future. We've got, again, the rumour is going out, has been going out for some years, there's no jobs for women in Sydney. That's rubbish. Every one of the women I've trained have had jobs, full-time jobs in Christian ministry. I've never found it impossible to find a full-time job for any woman I've trained, and I've trained hundreds. It's just not true, but it's the rumour that's out there. The second side of it is, though, in all our training for men and for women, we need to train entrepreneurs, not public servants. We need to train people who've got the mission of the gospel on their heart and mind, who are going to go out and create churches and create ministries, even if it means being a tent maker for 2 years or something or other, in order to build new work. We've got to stop thinking, well, we've got Sydney covered with 260 parishes, therefore we just need 260 clergy. Sydney has quadrupled in size since we divided up 260 parishes. I mean, it's an absurdity. We do not need more people just because we've got rings on the ground. What we need, though, are entrepreneurs who are going to go out and create ministries in schools, in hospitals, in different social structures, amongst different ethnic groups, whatever it might be. We need missioners who are going to mission, not public servants who are going to fill occupied jobs that are around, and I feel that Jane's creeping up on me.